So today I want to talk about congressional war authorization and how that relates to the ongoing tensions between the US and Iran. So just to get this straight out of the way, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11 of the US Constitution grants Congress the power to declare war. There is no other way of looking at this. Congress is the only body of the government authorized to declare war. Now, the president is the commander in chief, so they do have the authority to command the military, but it is explicitly stated in the Constitution that it is Congress and Congress alone that has the power to declare war. Now let's talk about how this relates to Iran, though. So the conflict with Iran has been escalating. I made a video about the conflict and the broader history of Iran. But just as a recap, recently a couple oil tankers exploded in the Straits of Hormuz. It is unknown who's behind the attacks. The U.S. government claims that Iran is behind it. Iran claims that they didn't do it. We should all be skeptical of both Iran and the U.S. I mean, the U.S. has justified wars under false pretenses many times before. Just look at the sinking of the Maine in the Spanish-American War. The Gulf of Tonkin resolution was false intelligence. In the Vietnam War, the first Iraq War, we entered the war under false testimony, giving about how the Iraqis were murdering babies in hospitals. Horrible things turned out to be completely fabricated by people who wanted to start the war, like foreign agents. You know, the most recent Iraq War with false intelligence about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. I mean, it's happened many times throughout U.S. history. I'm going to make a whole video on this soon. But anyway, even since then, the conflict's been escalating even more. Iran has shot down an unmanned drone. Again, the U.S. says that this drone was in international airspace. Iran says it was in their airspace, so they had the right to shoot it down. You know, who knows who's telling the truth here? We could assume that both are probably not being completely accurate. And then we found out that Trump was about to authorize a strike on Iran, but then later decided not to, unilaterally, okay? So instead, just today, Trump added more sanctions to Iran on top of their already crippling sanctions they've added since we've broken the Iran nuclear deal. This is just another obvious attempt to incite revolution in Iran. We've already stated that our goal is to completely destroy their oil exports. We want a net zero oil income from Iran. I mean, it's insane. I mean, we're doing the same thing in Venezuela. We're just trying to cripple the economy so much, starve the people to the brink of revolution, so that we can implement regime change, sweep in when the revolution starts, and quote-unquote save the day like the U.S. government has tried to do so many times before. But bombing Iran, which Trump almost did, as I mentioned, is an obvious act of war. Anyone who says it's not is absolutely foolish. I mean, the media has says the stupidest things like, oh, but it's just one strike. I mean, last year Trump launched a missile into Syria while still trying to claim that wasn't an act of war. This would be similar. I mean, it's as dumb as saying that Pearl Harbor wasn't an act of war from Japan just because it was a limited strike, quote unquote. What do you have to do? Do you have to send boots on the ground to declare war? I mean, even a blockade on a country is considered an act of war. So how is a missile strike not considered an act of war? If Iran were to bomb the US, you better believe that we would consider it an act of war, and many right-wingers would probably start pushing for a nuclear response to be on the table. Yet for some reason, we expect the rest of the world to act differently. I mean, I say for some reason, there are many reasons, mostly American exceptionalism, where the current great empire this world has seen. All of history has led to us, being this great empire, just as every other empire says. But the Constitution says that declaring war is a power vested only in Congress. This has largely been ignored since 9/11. I mean, right now we are currently backing the Saudi Arabian government in their genocide in Yemen, and we're heavily involved in the Syrian civil war, among many other conflicts around the world. All of this without congressional approval. Furthermore, we're still at war with Iraq and Afghanistan 18 years after those wars had been declared. So that means at this point you could have been born at 9/11 on 9/11 and now serve in the military to fight the wars that were supposed to be in a response to it. I mean, this is just insane. Those are trillions of dollars spent on these conflicts that should have gone to the American people, should have been paying for our health care, for education, for all the things that Americans lack right now. The justification for all of these wars without congressional approval has been the resolution passed after 9/11, which gave Bush the authority to go after the people who were responsible for 9/11. But here's the thing. You know what? 15 out of the 19 people who were directly responsible for 9/11 were from Saudi Arabia. So how the actual fuck can we use the resolution passed in response to 9/11 to justify us fighting with Saudi Arabia in their genocidal war in Yemen? I mean, that's the most absurd thing I've ever heard. If any one country was responsible for 9/11, wouldn't it be Saudi Arabia when 15 out of the 19 people were from there? It's just absolutely absurd that we could use a response to 9/11 to fight with Saudi Arabia, the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the entire world. Luckily, Congress has been trying to do something about it, led by the one and only Bernie Sanders. Thank you, Bernie. Earlier this year, Congress passed a bill to end the U.S. involvement in the war in Yemen. It wasn't just Bernie Sanders. This was a bipartisan bill with a couple Republican co-sponsors. It passed in both chambers. Trump vetoed this bill, and Congress has failed to overturn his veto. Going to war without congressional approval goes directly against the Constitution, and it should be viewed as treason, in my opinion. And I don't know why that's not like a legal standard. I mean, you're going directly against the Constitution. How is that not an act of treason? Honestly, Trump should be impeached for this treasonous act in both Yemen and Saudi Arabia before he unilaterally starts a war with Iran without congressional approval. Once again, I'm sure he would cite the 9/11 resolution that Congress gave to George W. Bush. I mean, how ridiculous is that? This would be a more serious crime than obstruction of justice, laid out in the Mueller report, or obvious emoluments violations, which Trump has done since his presidency by enriching himself through foreign nations, funneling money into his businesses, like the Trump hotels and golf courses, other stuff like that. Obvious stuff that is completely against the Constitution, all impeachable offenses. But the thing is, unilaterally going to war with Yemen, with Syria, and especially Iran would be so devastating and cost so many lives that it is absolutely treason and should absolutely be immediately brought forward for impeachment charges. I mean, we must go back to the standards of like Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter put his peanut farm in a blind trust in order to ensure that he wouldn't use his power to enrich himself through his peanut farm. Okay, this is the standards we used to hold presidents to in terms of corruption. I mean, gone are the days where Republicans would actually turn on the president, like during the Watergate scandal. We just have no accountability whatsoever. So a single person, being Donald Trump, who did not even win the popular vote, okay, so a majority of Americans already oppose him, and only 60% or so of eligible voters even vote to begin with due to massive disenfranchisement, can unilaterally be in control of waging war. I mean, we can't allow this. The Republican Party is supposed to be the party of strict constitutionalists, yet they again and again ignore the Constitution when it's convenient to them. It's just insane. We can't get drawn into another 18 plus year long conflict. War with Iran would cost many thousands of American lives. It'd be so far worse than the Iraq War. Probably like 5 to 10 times worse. I mean, Iran is a fully capable militant nation with population of like 60 million people. So guaranteed that tens of thousands of Americans would die over a decade plus long war, millions of Iranians. This would just cause another immigration crisis throughout probably Europe again. I mean, that's what happened in Syria during the Syrian civil war and continues to happen. $1 trillion will be spent on this conflict, which should be going to the American people. So, Nancy Pelosi, if you're listening to this, and I guarantee you're not, but Trump needs to be impeached over treason. If he decides to strike Iran unilaterally, that is an act of war. You are the Speaker of the House. You must assert your authority and Congress's authority to declare war. If you hand it over to Trump, then one day we'll have someone even worse than Trump in power, and he will use this authority to unilaterally declare war whenever they want. Okay, we can't allow this to happen. So, peace. Let's hope we don't end up at war with Iran. I'm not trying to get drafted. Let's be honest here. See ya.